Hello, welcome to another weekly update. I hope you've had a good week. Hope it's been a productive week. I'm feeling super productive and super organised. Recording this on a Friday night, not the usual scramble on a Sunday night. So that's all good. And I've even written some blog posts this week as well, which we're going to talk about. So yeah, you can't see, but nice tidy desk as well. I'm all set because it's going to be another busy couple of weeks. So yeah, so let's talk about the blog post then. So first one I put out this week was I've been kind of writing it on and off for a little bit, and it's one of those funny things. The blog posts I published this week were not the blog posts I thought I was going to publish this week. There was a series that I'm still kind of readying that I thought I was going to start this week. Probably will end up starting next week now instead. Anyway, yeah, the blog post I published this week was around publishing your Microsoft Teams apps to your company store. Now, what's your company store? Why do you care? Well, if you're writing Microsoft Teams applications, you'll know you can publish those to the Teams App Store so that everybody can download them and find them. And I've blogged about that before. There's a process you need to go through of verification and submission to the App Store. If you don't want to do that, you can sideload the apps, sideload them onto your machine. Good for developers, and if you've got a very small distribution group of people, you could just sideload your app onto each of those users and use them that way. But that doesn't really scale for organisations, and there's a kind of middle ground. There's a third way there where organisations want to have applications that they give out to the users, or they want to make them available to their users. Maybe they've developed them in-house, but they're not relevant to go onto the App Store. Maybe they are specific to the company. Maybe they contain company assets, internal HR or policies, or they link to back-end line of business applications. So it really doesn't make sense for them to be publicly published. And so announced at Ignite last year, you can now publish your Teams apps to a company store. And what that means is that your users in your tenant, in your organization, will be able to search almost like a subset, like another small store that just contains the apps that you've published to. And so that's really useful for organizations building these applications who want to make a really kind of curated list of their own applications for their users. So that's what the blog post talks about. It tells you exactly how you go through that process of publishing your applications to the company store, what to do when they're published, how to keep them up to date, how to remove them, how to restrict access, all those sort of things. So that's the kind of first blog post I put out this week. The second one I put out this week was a bit more devy, I suppose. Had a bit more code in it. Links to a new GitHub repository that I've created and made public, and that's around using Compose extensions. So you've probably heard Compose extensions mentioned. They're normally mentioned quite quickly in the same sentence when talking about Teams extensibility. And someone will say, Teams extensibility, you can do bots, you can do tabs, you can do connectors, you can do Compose extensions. And then they either go and talk about something else, or they usually go and talk about bots. And Compose extensions, I think, sometimes get a little bit looked over. But they're super, super powerful. And the reason they're super powerful is that they make it very easy to bring content from outside of Teams into Teams. And that information is super useful to conversations that users are having, but it might sit in a kind of third party or a legacy application somewhere in your organization. An example might be a products database. And so your users are having conversations all day long about products, and they're referencing these stock codes, but people in the conversation are constantly having to look these stock codes up in the products database, find out the current stock level, and find out the descriptions and all that sort of stuff to answer these questions. So being able to bring that information into Teams is very useful. What Compose extensions do, they live down the bottom where you build your messages, and it's where you've got all the little buttons for attaching a file, attaching an image, some emoji, the GIFs, the memes. You can add your own little button down there. And what that means is that you can let your users then search for your stuff. So instead of searching for GIFs, they can search for products in a product database. And then you can build up a card that gets put into the conversation. So that's kind of super powerful for unlocking a lot of data, and it's way easier than you think it's going to be. There's a lot of parallels with building compose extensions to building bots. So if you build bots for teams, you'll find actually that method, the approach, in fact a lot of the code is really very similar. And I go through that in the blog post, and again there's a sample in GitHub that I link to. And it's there's a little GIF at the beginning actually, so if you want to know what a compose extension is, go and have a look at that GIF. It's just a looping kind of little GIF of somebody using a compose extension. I built a kind of fake products database, if you like, so you can sort of see that being searched and somebody inserting a product from there. So yeah, compose extensions definitely worth looking at, I think, for that's kind of extensibility story. So that was the other thing I talked about this week. And then just a couple of things I want to leave you with some weekend reading, really, because there's no kind of big news in the space this week, particularly for developers in Skype for Business and Teams. But I've never kind of been afraid of putting in links that are only tangentially related to Skype for Business and Teams development. So this week I'm going to give you 2 links that are much broader to the Microsoft ecosystem, much broader to where Microsoft may or may not be going. So the first, and they both kind of come out this week, which is interesting. I think it's interesting. So the first is that Microsoft have partnered with Kroger. So Kroger are the largest supermarket chain in America, I believe. And they've partnered with Microsoft to create a kind of futuristic grocery store. Now, if that sounds very much like something Amazon have already done, you'd be absolutely right. I think it's very interesting that Microsoft are getting into this space. I think, honestly, Microsoft can probably execute it more completely than Amazon have to date. And I think it's interesting Microsoft going there because it gives them a lot of information. It builds out their data store. So Microsoft are quietly collecting interesting, useful AI data about the whole shopping process, about ordering and about buying, and all of that. And I think that's interesting. What's also interesting this week is the second blog post. So Microsoft also signed a deal with Walgreens, big kind of pharmaceutical outlet, kind of drugstores and all that sort of stuff. Let me see what the deal was for. I think it was kind of strategic, but it was also to kind of do something. I think it was let's have a look. Again, it's the kind of thing I think Amazon are doing. It's digitizing some of that, how people buying things from drugstores and chemists. It's Microsoft getting more into health as well. So we've talked about Microsoft and health in this podcast before, around the scope of AI. This is much more bricks and mortar. It's boots on the ground. It's infrastructural healthcare. But that's really interesting as well. I think those 2 stories together, the kind of supermarket and the chemist chain, signifies something happening inside Microsoft. And I don't know what it is. It's interesting though, and I think it's maybe Microsoft moving into the space that traditionally Amazon have held, and I think that's probably a good thing for everyone. It's good to have more players in a space. It'll be interesting to see what Microsoft do there. It probably won't affect us in terms of Teams and Skype for Business development, but all this stuff is always interesting, the kind of greater story. So I wanted to put those 2 links in for some weekend reading because I genuinely think they're interesting, and it's interesting to see where Microsoft are going. Alright, that's nearly me at time. I waffled on for a bit about those last 2, but just because I thought they were interesting. Go and have a look at those 2 blog posts if they sound interesting. Some more blog posts are coming out this next week. Meanwhile, have a lovely weekend, and I will speak to you again next time.